Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachael Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. Well, Dan, as we this conversation on resurrection, I would love to hear how your Easter was.
My Easter was fabulous. First of all, we had many of our grandchildren. Just day, which is unusual in the Seattle area during that season. And Becky prompts each of them, especially the very young. She prepares them to carry up weeks before so that they can go through the process of an Easter egg hunt. Look, the whole notion of the Easter bunny, I get it. I get Christians are offended by it's a freaking metaphor of fecundity, of the idea of life, growing life. And yeah, bunnies have more bunnies, but also they lay eggs and they're to be found. And the joy of our grandchildren rushing around, the older having to deal with a little bit of patience to not push the younger down, the adults all running around trying to get children on film. It's chaos. It's this glorious, amorphous chaos. So thank you. It was a very resurrection day. But as we what I want you to hear, even from that, is that there's a story. Look, last week, we addressed far more what I would call the theological undergirding. That more into the story of what the resurrection brings. And again, if there's one word that people hear, this is deadly serious play. Play where we get to stand before evil, before darkness, before kingdoms of evil, and be able to say, as Paul did at the end of 1 Corinthians 15, there's your sting. There is that, what we spoke about last time as defiance, disruption, a desire, growing engagement with and through for the life that is and will one day be fully.
Yeah.
So where we are heading is a passage that if you you might want to take your Bible now and look at Luke chapter 24. If you don't want to do that, then listen to the podcast, but come back to 24. It's so long. It's so beautiful. We're going to highlight a few of the sections of it, but there's just nothing like being in the text and getting a feel for the chaos, craziness, wildness, and eventually again want to come back to say something about the playfulness. Well, the women are coming back to anoint the body. They discover that the stone has been rolled away. They come in the tomb, the cave, and there is no Jesus, but two dudes whose white clothing is like lightning, and they're a bit befuddled. I think that's a fair beginning to say. The resurrection is really meant to befuddle you. And we spoke a lot about that last time. Death seems to win. Despair seems more consistent than joy. But the fact that if you're not confused by the resurrection, I don't think you've really thought much about it. So the arrival of the women to the tomb itself is pretty wild in terms of who encounters the reality of the risen Christ first?
Yeah, I will admit I'm probably a little more fond gospel version of the women, just because I think like fleeing in terror at the empty tomb feels to me like, they obviously are the first evangelists too, but like fleeing in terror at something so absurd and so to me feels a little more like, that feels real. But all throughout the gospels, the women who follow they tend to be, at least in some regard, a little more faithful in these moments of disruption and despair. And, they are going, would have been a ritual women would have carried out. They are going to anoint, to bring the spices. And yet they are the first witnesses to the resurrection.
And let's just underscore, this is core to the notion of the gospel itself. Men are hiding away out of fear, going to be pursued, that there will be judgment and consequences. And the women are there at the cross until its completion. They're there at the very of daylight on that Sunday. And in any context, women were seen as not reputable. In structures of law, their testimony was never counted to be true. Only testimony confirmed by two men would actually be viewed as something that is true. So the fact that the first evangelists are women has to be intended by the Father for the purpose of, in some sense, dysregulating, disrupting the misogyny of that day and that culture. So if we don't see the resurrection story in and of itself as a form of, this is the resurrection fruit already being played out, women are the primary voice of the resurrection, at least initially.
Yeah, and they don't believe them.
Peter, which I think is hilarious, is the only dude who runs. Now, again, the angels have made it very clear. This should have been known. Why among the dead, the angel says, he's not here, he is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee. So, at least from the angel's standpoint, this not so much a mystery, but nonetheless, nobody seems to understand it. Nobody seems to be able to imply the implications. Yet Peter runs. He runs back. But even then, there is no sense of, oh my gosh, let's all go to the tomb to see the glory of what he told us now evidenced. It brings me comfort. But I love the fact this story reveals what a unhearing, unseeing, essentially unbelieving mess were after being with Jesus 3.5 years. Sometimes I wonder as a teacher whether people get something of what I'm hoping for. I kind of wonder if I get what I'm hoping to not only give, but to receive. And this is so comforting. They don't get much of anything. And yet the disruption of the women, again, I just have to laugh and go, yeah, I'm pretty much fearful. Maybe the impulsive Peter is there, but nobody believes. Nobody gets it. And it kind of allows me, even in the Easter season, to basically go, I don't think I get it. I'm not sure I believe it. But stay with the story. See where it goes. And that's the shift to Jesus taking a walk with two disciples as they go to Emmaus. And, apparently he's unrecognizable to them. I don't know if that's a wig or whether that's just a spiritual hiding. But whatever it is, they don't recognize him. And so he basically kind of goes, what's going on? What are you guys discussing? They are downcast. And one of them says, can you hear the contempt in this? Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened? See, even comforting, because in the midst of my chaos, confusion, when death looks like it's winning, contempt is my shield. So basically, idiot, you fool, where have you been? Jesus just asks, what things? Oh, about Jesus. And then he's a prophet, the ruler over, he was the one going to redeem Israel. I mean, do you hear the loss, confusion, and contempt? Reality of these folks' lives is that nothing of what Jesus seemed to have taught them seems to have remained or clarified what was going to happen. What begins to happen is he takes them to what he calls Moses and the prophets to explain how the Christ had to suffer and die and to be resurrected. And their hearts say to him, come with us, stay with us. It's too late to be going on. And yet, in the middle of all that, he disappeared. I mean, this sounds more like, I don't know, ghost story as to, like, it's just so wild to think about. These guys were eating, hearing, maybe having the first sense of maybe our Jesus told us now is beginning to make a little bit of sense. Again, I need to be a person who owns the fact that a lot of this very confusing to me after even 40 some years of being a follower of Jesus. Their confusion, they're not seeing, they're not quite understanding how to read the Old Testament, all that. So comforting.
Well, it's interesting that it is a ritual he did with them that actually brings the revealing, the revelation, the unveiling of he is the one, the one that they've loved. And because it says, they're urging him to stay. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took the bread, blessed it, and broke it and gave it to them. Then their eyes were open and they recognized him. And that's when he vanishes from their.
Like, wait a minute. Like at that moment, why don't you stay for a few moments of accolade? Or, just like a conversation like, hey guys, isn't this amazing? Certainly not. And then he shows up where the other disciples are basically hiding. And the dialogue and the conversation, oh my gosh, peace be with you. A very formal, regular greeting, at least we understand in that day. Much like, hey, how you doing? Don't like, hey, what you doing? How are you? And from that point, from verse 36, it's just, again, they're startled, they're frightened, they think they saw a ghost. And his response, why are you troubled? Why do doubts rise in your minds? Well, you weren't here. Are you kidding, Jesus? This is all supposed to be just like normal? I give them a lot of credit in that position of going, what? And his response ultimately is, look at my hands and feet, touch me. We need to underscore the resurrection is about the body. And Jesus does all sorts of things with regard to inviting touch. Of course, I know you're confused, but I'm going to give you prima engagement with my body. Come look, come see, come touch. And eventually, I'm going to even basically know that you think I'm a ghost. So I'm going to ask for some food. Maybe I'm hungry. The bottom line is Jesus is messing with every category of their own understanding of life at this point. And in that, I just want to kind of take us to the question of, well, what does it mean to grow in the power of the resurrection? Does it mean that we're not confused, that we don't see, that we're blind, that he appears, that he disappears, that he shows himself? I kind of want to come back to this key word. Opens up, I think, in this encounter, just a very playful Jesus.
Yeah, and I think we probably have to mess playful a little bit, because I would imagine when people hear play, you imagine your kids playing, you imagine, maybe someone who tends to tell jokes, or, think, oh, they're not that serious, right? So I would be curious, Dan, when you think of play and playful, what comes to mind? What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, let's just start with this. The disciples who were walking to Emmaus, he didn't have to disappear. Like the moment they realized who he is, don't you think a nice ending would have been, hey, look, I'm glad you recognized who I am. It's going to matter a lot to you in the next few days, weeks, months, years. I'll be letting you know through something called a little bit about what you're going to be doing. But hey, I've got to show up for those other disciples. And as a guest, to just disappear, look, it's at least weird. But I think it's actually a way of saying, I'm going to let my very presence burn in you in a way in which your desire come alive. And in that moment, I'm gone. And then he shows up. No trumpets, no... Like he could have had the angels go, a big arrival's about to occur. All be ready. He just shows up at essentially at a meal time with how you doing?
Well, it also makes me think about like this, because I think one of the parts of this text that always grips me is right after he vanishes from the two disciples on the road, and they say, were not our hearts burning while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us? And it makes me think about how Jesus says, while he was on the earth before he died, there will be times you encounter me. You will encounter me in the least of these, and you won't see it because you really don't actually understand who I am and what it means, that like the ways in which I am bringing about liberation and salvation are going to look so different than the world. So it makes me think about the times I've encountered people who I think have been and embodied. And I do believe in a real resurrected Jesus. The sci-fi part of me is like, of course, Jesus is like coming into the metaphysical body, disappearing, because obviously he can like travel through quantum, dimension. So like I have no problem imagining kind of this disappearing, vanishing, showing up in a very real body. But I something here that alludes to this reality of like, we may not always recognize Jesus because we still yet don't fully understand who Jesus is. And I think about times I've had encounters with other human beings where I walk away and was my heart not burning inside of me when this person was with me, when they are opening up something of the truth of God, whether that's like a Bible verse or just some sense of they are something to me about who Jesus is. And so there is a very playful way in which his presence in the midst of this resurrection moment, these first encounters, that is both playful and I think very humanizing and very inviting.
Oh, well, and think in terms of, the Matthew 24, 25, 26 section where essentially you didn't give me water. You didn't give me food. You didn't give me clothing. You didn't give me medicine. Well, when? Well, refuse to feed the poor, when you refuse to see yourself as rich yet poor, when you don't give what you have to offer, whether it be a mite as a widow or whether it be thousands of dollars. The bottom line is, when we feed those who don't seem predictable, they don't have power, they are not predictable, they're not the people you think actually be invited to the party, that's when Jesus says, that's when you met me. So the playfulness of Jesus is always kingdom oriented, always about always a standing against structures, systems, the heart of death, and yet bringing a life that truly is my comprehension. I mean, I find myself even in this discussion, I'm still befuddled. Like, what am I trying to say? He's wilder, just wilder. So dear, so intense, inviting so much of the heart to come alive, to doubt, to test, to feel and touch. And yet in that, being invited to then determine how we will live, what we will do with one another, and how we will care with our wealth for the poor and name as poor, needing the wealth of others. So that wacky reversal, it just gives me a sense that, I know it's a dangerous, but this is meant to be a lot more fun than sometimes I hear people speak about their life and ministry and their labor. Like, this is crazy. This is madness. Enter into something of the wild madness of God, then it either becomes dutiful and exhausting, or you dispense it for others to live rather than seeing how my marriage ought to grow with a sense of bewilderment, but also with a sense of the goodness of God and the land of the living playing out in my life.
And I think that's why on Easter Sunday, we always dance in our home, even if it's just the four of us, because there's something about dance that feels so deeply connected to the resurrection play of God. It is a defiant joy, a joining in the dance of God with creation that I think is meant to change us. I think sometimes we don't always see the signs of resurrection around us. And I appreciate the invitation, Dan, to look for the holy, wild, disruptive Jesus who is with us and who is in our midst.
Well, I love that image of you and Michael and the boys dancing, because where is the resurrection lived out most deeply, it's in a memorial of death, the body and the blood. Yet it's also the meal that prefigures the wedding feast of the Lamb and that joy. And I can't think of the two of you dancing. I had the privilege of being in your gorgeous home in Philadelphia, but do I have an image? Oh yeah, baby, of you and Michael at your wedding. And seriously, what were those things that?
Oh, the little glow sticks, glow.
Yeah.
Glow
Oh golly, it was so silly. And again, my ability to dance basically down to an 80s routine of where what am I calling it? Like you work out.
Oh yeah, jazzercise.
I just hop up and the freedom though in that kind of play. We have celebrated. You two have become united, and in that sweet gift being played out, it's communion, banquet, celebration, and standing before death, and ultimately again saying, "Sucker, you fool." And I think that's why we want to end by saying, we know Easter's over. Easter's never over for us. We are meant to embody the body and blood. We are meant to dance at the banquet and to, in that sense, join the bewilderment while we get Jesus some fish to further show us that he's going to one day dine with us with fine food and drink, good music, dancing, and ultimately as wild as we encounter in Luke 24. May the resurrection be ours ongoing.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.